Okay, excellent.
Perfect.
Well, welcome to, I believe, the second GIS day for this week. I'm going to try to make some remarks about using GIS to improve energy, environment, and equity across the county. But before I jump into the energy standpoint, energy environment standpoint, which is the area that I cover, I do want to point out that the board adopted this week a very groundbreaking motion on closing the digital divide, and GIS tools were so critical in our department's analysis of where the broadband gaps are, and will continue to be an important tool to help us address and close that digital divide. We have a lot of assets across the county, from streetlight poles to parks to libraries, etc., where broadband infrastructure could be sited that will help these communities gain access, especially in the areas where there isn't much access right now. In terms of using GIS tools, we've been doing that in the county for about a decade or more, for the purpose of trying to improve our environment and our energy infrastructure. So there's a tool that our teams created about a decade ago. It's the LA County Solar Map application, and what it does is it actually it's a very advanced set of tools that looks at imagery, satellite and aerial imagery, to identify rooftops, and using that both on commercial, residential, and even parking lots. It identifies opportunities for solar, how much solar you can put on those rooftops, what is the expected annual energy that you can capture from solar systems, and what your potential savings might be. And so our team was pretty groundbreaking in adopting these GIS tools. We also regularly use Cal EnviroScreen tools to look at areas in the county that have increased pollution burdens, and we try to target programs to focus on those areas and reduce those pollution burdens in our community. The GIS team, even before the pandemic, was worked with our department to evaluate and quantify the environmental benefits of alternative work sites. So about 2 years ago or so, ISD embarked on contracts with alternative work site providers like WeWorks, etc., where county employees could go there at one of those sites instead of their normal work site, with the purpose of reducing their commutes. And we were able to aggregate and calculate the aggregated benefits of doing these alternative work sites. And when the pandemic hit, actually, these tools were then reapplied to look at the county writ large, and looking at a roughly 1 year period between March of 2020 and March of 2021. We saw that roughly 60,000 county employees teleworked, a total of about 6.5 million workdays. Okay. Now, when you think about, and since we know where people live and where their normal work sites are, you can estimate how many miles of, reduced travel, our county employees who teleworked were able to achieve in aggregate during this time period. A single commute may not be that much, but when you do that, over the course of a year and the number of employees that we have, you see savings on the order of like 216 million miles. When you translate that to gallons of gas saved, that's like almost 10 million gallons of gasoline, or our county employees saved nearly $32 million in aggregate. And of course, there's lots of savings in terms of traffic time, and then GHG emissions reductions. And so, using the tools that the GIS team developed before the pandemic, they were able to apply basically the same methodologies and the same approaches to look at aggregated benefits. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about electric vehicles here, because these are active projects that we have going on. When you map out all the EV charging stations across the county, we're certainly an area of high EV adoption, electric vehicle adoption in the country, which is great. There's a lot of public stations on the left. On the right-hand side, I show the county-owned stations, both for with public access and also for just county fleet use. And of course, it's a lot more sparse. But these are the tools that allow us to identify where we might consider putting the next stations in. Okay, there's a lot of opportunity. You look at when you zoom in on these maps. A zoomed out map looks like it's pretty dense, but the reality is it's really not that dense. When you think about how many gas stations we have across the county, you compare how many EV stations we have across the county. But then there's also the issue that gas stations have been built for 100 years, right? EV charging stations really only the last 5 years. But so there's a lot of opportunity to increase that adoption, especially in disadvantaged communities who were not the early adopters of electric vehicles. And then we're also collaborating with MIT and looking at how there's a gap between where what communities have access to EV infrastructure. Okay, this particular plot, looks at some data from LA City, and you can compare it to other cities around the country. Is there a racial difference in charging station access? In LA versus other regions or other cities around the country. And it turns out, at least for the African American population, the charging access is actually pretty close to the general population access. And then we're also collaborating with researchers at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs on projects to look at urban heat island reduction and looking at how we can improve and reduce, mitigate the impacts of an increased warming in our communities. Using even more advanced tools. Machine learning using various imagery data sets that we have available in the county and drones that might be able to be flown. We can look more specifically at individual buildings and calculate solar coverage, shading coverage, what might be shaded by trees, etc. Looking at window coverage, window exposure to look at how much heat will strike our buildings and ways that we can reduce the urban heat island effect, potentially doing more energy efficiency upgrades, including building fenestrations to reduce the impact of or to reduce the electric load on the air conditioning system, which is a big electric load in our region. And then we can also look at adding demand flexibility on the building stock. There are some tools at our national labs that can look at alternative active ways to control and manage our building control systems so that we can, again, reduce the electric load and add flexibility to the energy and building infrastructure that we do have. So I'm going to conclude. I know I went really, really fast. But I'm going to conclude by saying that for those who have been watching the news, the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill was signed, just this week. Supervisor Hilda Solis was there in Washington with President Biden at the signing. There is, a lot of traditional things in infrastructure like roads and bridges, but there's also a lot of discussion around energy, broadband, cybersecurity, et cetera. Okay, and so when you think about $1.2 trillion and you think that in LA County, we represent about 1 out of 33 people in the United States. Okay, and you divide, 1.2 trillion by that population. Our region should be expecting on the order of $36 billion. Okay, that's a lot of funding. It's not going to go to the county directly, et cetera, like that. But there's going to be a lot of opportunities for the county and partners in our region to capture some of that funding that we can improve equity. We can improve a lot of issues in our communities from an energy standpoint, from a broadband standpoint, from cybersecurity standpoint, et cetera. All these tools, all these programs are going to have an RDI lens. race, diversity, and equity and inclusive lens in the funding that they are releasing. That's going to be pipelined either through federal agencies or the state. So we actually met with Steve yesterday and kind of reiterated the importance of using GIS tools to identify areas of our communities and even projects that we can propose to state and federal agencies for investment. And so, their team, Steve's team is going to be working very hard in collaboration, with teams across the county, in particular ISD, in trying to apply for a lot of these grants. I'm expecting that we might win maybe 5% of the grants that we submit, but I'm planning on submitting hundreds of millions of dollars worth of grant applications. So the opportunity to capture some of the infrastructure funding to improve our county and achieve our county's objectives is very high. And I want to say here that GIS tools will be front and center and an important part of how we achieve that goal. So thank you very much.